It was a combination of living in Boston, but also research that I'd been doing for my idea for the movie of Matewan, and learning about the Cold Wars. I had hitchhiked across the country a couple times, and on one of my trips, when I was going through West Virginia and Kentucky, an awful lot of the people who picked me up were coal miners, and they were in the middle of this awful, very contentious race for the head of the UMW between Jock Yablonsky and Tony Boyle, which ended when Tony Boyle, who was the incumbent, had Jock Yablonsky and his wife murdered. And but before that, when I was hitchhiking, guys were just shaking their heads and saying, "Boy, it hadn't been this bad since the Matewan massacre." And I just, wow, geez, how come I never heard of that? And I kind of looked into that history. I had known something about the Hatfields and McCoys, and sure enough, there was a Hatfield involved in the story. And it just seemed like, well, this is real American history, and it has a lot of the qualities of a Western. It literally ends with a shootout on Main Street at high noon. And that just seemed like, well, boy, that would make a really interesting movie. So I'd started doing a lot of research about that. And a lot of that got into the very beginning of Union Dues. And then, having been in the, in college from, my freshman year was right after the 1968 riot in Chicago at the convention. A lot of stuff was happening in America in those years, and seeing how those political groups often were devolving into kind of cults, political cults, that were losing touch with the people who they kept saying that they were representing. And the people kept shifting to smaller and smaller groups, or more and more distant groups. I was interested in dealing with all of that stuff. Once you kind of establish who the character is and get into their heads a little bit, you may have wanted to lead them somewhere, but once they get in that situation, they're going to act like their character would. And just you try to do something else and it doesn't seem right. One is this kid who knows what he doesn't want to do. He doesn't want to be in a coal mine. He doesn't want to go to Vietnam like his brother did. He does want to find his brother, but that's kind of just a shot in the dark. He just sees nothing good ahead of him in this holler that he's grown up in, and his father's a good guy. He doesn't dislike his father. He just thinks his father has been badly treated, and he doesn't want that same life for himself. And then his father, the mother is gone, she's dead. His older son came back kind of messed up from Vietnam and is gone. What's he doing this for anymore? Just because he's a creature of habit. So he goes on the road too, looking for his kid. And there were an awful lot of people, if not geographically, physically looking for something in those 60s and early 70s. An awful lot were looking for something kind of psychologically or spiritually. And a lot of people just, they just took right turns in their lives. I started making movies when there were only 3 or 4 film schools. There were 2 or 3 books about making films. There weren't computers and courses online yet. There wasn't all this kind of available stuff. So I really went back. The literary agent who I had been working with then, John Sterling, said, "Oh, why don't we just do this movie's getting some play. Why don't we do a screenplay book?" And I said, that's kind of, you can see the movie. But what if we publish a screenplay and then I talk about why it changed and how it changed without necessarily even changing a line sometimes. All the other choices that you make that make it into a movie rather than a screenplay. And he said, that sounds good. And so I was living in Hoboken, New Jersey, and taking a bus in to New York every day to do the sound mix on Matewan. So it was in my head as I was still working on the movie as I wrote it. And really what I wanted to do was to write the book that I wish I had had when I started making movies, that would have made me think about stuff, not telling anybody how to do it, because everybody's going to have their own style and their own way of going about things. But here are all the things that are storytelling things. Costume is a storytelling element. Who the actors you hire is a storytelling element. If you cast Don Knotts instead of Clint Eastwood, you've got a totally different movie, no matter how you direct them. The environment is, where you choose to shoot it. That's a storytelling element. Where you put the camera, what the music is. Is it a fast cutting movie or more of a dissolvey movie? Those kind of things are all storytelling choices that you've got to make. And I wanted to kind of enumerate, my thinking on that particular movie in all those areas. And all the way through the editing and the post. And so it's, I meant it, my deal was, this can't cost more than a certain amount of money. I forget what it was, because books were a lot cheaper then, because I want film students and just people who aren't even film students who want to make a movie to be able to afford this thing. So we decided, well, the pictures aren't going to be in color. That's fine with me. They'll be in black and white. They can see the movie. So it was actually, it was interesting to write, thinking about it, and also just kind of going back into my storyboards and oh, that's right, I did make this decision at this point, and that's why I did this and that. You don't often examine those things right after you make a movie. You usually move on to another one.